Overseas now, there are new signs of rising tensions between Israel and Washington, just as the U.S. appears on the brink of sending $26 billion in aid. The Biden administration is expected to announce sanctions this week on an Israeli military unit, a move that's angering the country's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
אני אגן בחירוף נפש על צה"ל.
Israel's handling of aid supplies and its planned ground offensive in Rafah have previously contributed to tensions with the U.S. For more, let's turn to journalist Eris Mackler in Jerusalem. So, Eris, what more can you tell us about proposed U.S. sanctions and that aid that is set to be sent to Israel?
Yes, it's amazing that the two come at the same time, isn't it? So billions of dollars in aid and sanctions against a military unit, Netzah Yehuda. It's a unit that operated in the West Bank for many years, many complaints about violence against Palestinians. I think the American involvement comes from a case of a Palestinian American who died after he was arrested, actually detained. He wasn't even arrested, detained by soldiers from that unit. It was January 2022. I covered this story for the CBC. He was a 78-year-old man with, grocery stores in Milwaukee. He was held at night in winter, stopped on his way home, bound, gagged, held outside. He had a heart condition and they left him there. When they untied him, they saw that he was unconscious and said they presumed he was asleep and they left him. Because of the US involvement, I think, there was an IDF inquiry, an investigation found the soldiers hadn't behaved properly. There was a reprimand for one, some were moved. The US also demanded a proper legal procedure of some kind, and that didn't happen. And I think perhaps that's the source of this action today, these sanctions. Israel, the IDF did move that unit out of the West Bank, sometime later in December. They have now been fighting in Gaza, for example. But I think that's why we've seen this US action, and we've seen a very strong response, actually outrage, from the right-wing and settler parties, Jewish settlers in this government. It's a very hard right government. So many of those politicians furious, the Prime Minister furious, and a centrist minister saying he was just on the phone tonight to his colleagues in Washington asking them to rethink this.
And while the war in Gaza has dominated headlines, there continues to be deadly violence in the West Bank. Israeli troops have just concluded an operation there that claimed a number of lives. What can you tell us about that?
I can tell you that after 50 hours, the IDF says it withdrew from Nur Shams, which is near Tulkarem, a town in the north of the West Bank, let's say. And what they are saying is that there were clashes there in which Palestinian sources report 14 people died. The IDF says 8 or 9 of its troops were also injured. So it was clashes with, with what Israel would call militants in the West Bank. So we've seen that. We've seen an extraordinary escalation on the northern border. So that's Lebanon's southern border, Israel's northern border. That's been going on all week. I guess what we've seen, Asha, since the Iranian threat we've seen that episode de-escalate, then we've really seen what's been going on the 3 other fronts, in the West Bank today, on the northern border, Israel's northern border for, some weeks now, and in Gaza as well today, where we've seen an upsurge in Israeli airstrikes.
Yeah, many corners of this conflict. Appreciate this. Thank you, Eris.